Five Nights at Freddy's has blown up for its innovative jump scares, but Fnaf has exploded in popularity for its other horror aspects as well. The intrigue of the lore has kept viewers engaged for almost an entire decade. But what is the scariest moment in each Fnaf game? There are so many incredible horror scenes in the Fnaf catalog. Some games have more than others, and some are lacking in horror. Let's break down every Fnaf game and find the scariest part of every game, starting with Fnaf 1 has a lot of great parts that have gone into it. From the hints to the bite of 87, Bonnie randomly staring into the camera in the parts and service room, and the overall vibe of the pizzeria all mixed together is very terrifying in and of itself. But to me, the scariest part of Fnaf 1 is either Golden Freddy or when you lose power and Freddy comes to your door. The argument for both of these being the scariest part of Fnaf 1 is really strong. Seeing Golden Freddy just appear in your office and not knowing what to do, and then him jump scaring you brings a whole lot of emotions, and is really terrifying for the first time. But Freddy coming to your door is eventually what I decided upon being my scariest part of Fnaf 1, especially on your first time that you run out of power. You're not quite sure what's going to happen, and then you start hearing Toreador March music box start playing, and you look to your left, and you see Freddy's head just twitching in and out of sight. The lights go out, and for an unknown amount of time, you hear Freddy's footsteps enter your office as you know your inevitable fate is coming to an end. Especially if it's 5 AM or anywhere close when you're losing your power. The unpredictability of Freddy, honestly throughout the entire game, is what makes this section so tense. You're just hoping that the clock hits 6 AM while you hear Freddy's footsteps get closer and closer, and sometimes you're met with the clock turning to 6 and immediate safety, but sometimes you're met with a jump scare. Fnaf 2, being one of the best games in the franchise, obviously comes with a lot of great jump scares and horror sequences. I would say that the scariest part of Fnaf 2 is the marionette or the puppet, where the only real use of the cameras in Fnaf 2 being to wind up the music box so that you don't get jump scared by the puppet, having a lot of other distractions, say 10 other animatronics, makes the puppet's music box one of the most stressful and terrifying parts of the game. Seeing the flashing orange warning sign in the bottom right corner of the screen turn to an even faster flashing red sign while being stuck in the mask while, say, Toy Bonnie is in the office is one of the most stressful parts of the game. Knowing that if you don't wind up the music box, you would be jump scared by the puppet, ending the run. This game introduces the puppet as such a mysterious character. We know, or at least we can infer, that Mangle and Toy Bonnie are animatronics and toys that were sold as a part of Freddy Fazbear's brand. Mangle has even been confirmed to be an animatronic that kids would take apart and put back together. Hence why Hence why Mangle is so much more broken than the other animatronics in Fnaf 2. Fnaf 3 doesn't really have a lot of scary parts to it, let's be honest. That is one of the biggest criticisms of the game, especially when it first came out. First of all, the Phantom animatronics all have very good jump scares. They don't do anything necessarily different than the past games other than not starting over the night. But they're not horrible jump scares, unlike Springtrap. Springtrap is a very terrifying character to begin with, but his jump scare is just not very strong, to put it kindly. However, I do have a few submissions for what I believe to be the scariest part of this game. 1. Seeing Springtrap enter the vents for the first time was quite terrifying to me. As he gets closer and closer, you begin to panic and try and lure him away from your office as fast as possible. With no doors in Fnaf 3, you are forced to use sound lures to keep Springtrap away from your office. So seeing these, especially for the first time, introduces a whole nother thing to keep track of on top of everything else. The 8-bit mini-games in this series aren't necessarily terrifying, it is just pixels on a screen after all. Wait, isn't that just every game in the franchise? At the end of the 5th night, seeing Purple Guy, aka William Afton, being chased around by a bunch of ghost children and being forced into the Spring Bonnie suit is very confusing. At this point in the franchise, we haven't gotten much information about Springlocks or anything of the sort. So seeing the suit collapse in on itself after William enters thinking that he's safe is jarring on your first watch through. At this point in the franchise, we haven't learned yet that William Afton always comes back. So this death is the most important part of the franchise up until this point, and is arguably still one of the best scenes in all of Five Nights at Freddy's.
Son of a bitch! Jesus. Okay, so the first night is never usually that bad in any of the games, so I'll play through.
Fnaf 4 is my favorite game in the franchise by far. An upcoming video will be about why that is, but for now we're here to talk about the scariest part of the game. Fnaf 4 is obviously the scariest game in the franchise, and it's not even close. The designs of the animatronics in this game were made to purely look like nightmare versions of the normal gang we've come to know and love. The intricate details, just like a kid's imagination, are some of the most terrifying bits to me about the Nightmare animatronics. Nightmare is literally in the name, and with Night 6 introducing a completely new character, well, maybe not completely new, but introducing Nightmare randomly at 4 AM is very scary in my opinion. Having all the other animatronics stop activating, no longer seeing mini Fredbears on our bedside, and then randomly seeing this new figure in our hallway completely disrupts the night. We've come to know how the game essentially works over the past 5 nights, but now this new introduction of a character that we haven't learned how to react to yet, it makes this section of the game especially disrupting. But to me, it's not quite the scariest part of the game. To me, that award goes to yet another 8-bit minigame, and I bet you know where I'm going with this one. After the 6th night, we see who we've come to recognize as our player character, also known as the Crying Child, who we see being carried out in Fredbear's family diner by someone who is presumably the Crying Child's older brother and a couple of his friends. We get to see these terrifying lines from the group, and then the Crying Child is put into the mouth of Fredbear, and you all know what happens next. This, to me, is the most jarring part of the entire franchise. It's the most in-depth kill we've seen in the series so far, and even the Springlock scene in Fnaf 3 doesn't compare to the Bite of 87.
Was that the Bite of 87?
Sorry, the Bite of 83. Sister Location is the biggest and most fleshed out game in the franchise so far. Maybe not the scariest game, but it's incredibly well done and does have some scary moments in it. I'm going to have to say that the scooping room scene is probably the most unnerving scene from the entirety of Sister Location. We basically have been taught throughout the nights that Baby has been trying to help us and has a sort of protagonistic character, and yet she is the one who leads us to the scooping room, with Baby's unnerving lines, Ennard crawling on the outside of the glass, and the big old scooper right in front of us with the other animatronics' limbs scattered across the floor, and the actual scooping scene. There's nothing else in Sister Location quite like the scooping room. With the games only getting better in quality, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator is one that stands out to me that's one of the best in the series. There are so many crazy scary scenes and mechanics that go into Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Having to complete all the tasks in the night shift section of the game, and not having just a certain amount of time that you have to survive until is something that I didn't expect to be so scary. Having to lower your guard multiple times throughout the night shift, and not having any real way to protect yourself because there are no doors, only vents. We don't really know how well the flashlight keeps the animatronics away, and you can rarely ever tell where the animatronics even are in the vents. The tension throughout the night shift doesn't ever leave, and if you make the mistake on your first playthrough to buy the advertisements, you will surely be sorry because god, those things are so loud. The salvages also play a lot of tricks on your mind, similarly to the night shift section, with having to look down at the paper after every audio cue plays and letting the animatronic you are salvaging have a chance to get closer, and only having 3 tases before you start damaging the animatronic, and losing the revenue that you would gain from the salvage. And in later nights, knowing that if you were to fail that the animatronic still gets into your restaurant, and you have to deal with them throughout the night and that you get none of the money from the salvage, it really plays tricks on you. With all that being said, I'm going to have to give the scariest scene in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator to the opening scene of the game. You have to remember that this game was not sold as a normal Fnaf game. It was described by Scott Cawthon as a free gift for the community, and like the name says, a pizzeria simulator. Starting the game, you do just that. You simulate giving pizza to some children, and then this gray animatronic starts stealing the pizzas. You make it past the glitching gray bear, presumably Lefty in my headcanon, and everything starts glitching out, and then you get cut to black. You hear a fan rumbling, and Scrap Baby appears on the screen. This one scene has convinced a good chunk of the community the Pizzeria Simulator was going to be different, and they would be right. From the 3 different stages of the game, to the wackiness of the whole situation, to Henry's ending monologue, Pizzeria Simulator has some of the best sections that the FNAF franchise has to offer, and my personal favorites.
Oh my god! Are you kidding me?
Ultimate Custom Night, or UCN, isn't really regarded as a very scary game. It does have some jump scares, don't get me wrong, but because of the sheer way that the game plays, jump scares are the most expected part of the game. And with the jump scares themselves being shaking PNGs, I'm not going to really give UCN a scariest scene because, well, just look at it. Instead, I'm going to go for the funniest parts of the game, because that's honestly more interesting to me. The unlockable cutscenes are honestly some of the funniest parts that the franchise has to offer. It's such an abrupt thing for Scott to add, but also such a Scott thing for Scott to add. Mr. Hippo's death audios are honestly one of my favorite parts of UCN. His 4-minute rambles make it worth restarting the run. Also, his joke about theorizing was pretty funny. Nope.
Hello, boys and girls. I'm here to give you your happiest day ever. Come with me, wayward souls. We've got vengeance to strike.
Help Wanted was our first introduction to Steel Wool Studios, and I would say that they nailed it with this game. It was so much fun to replay all of my favorite parts of the Fnaf franchise in VR for the first time, and playing all the new mini-games was awesome. With a sequel coming out next week, Help Wanted has definitely proved itself to the community to be one of the most polished games in the FNAF's ever-growing catalog. But the scariest part of Help Wanted isn't a very easy task to figure out. All of the original games were scary on their own, but being put into virtual reality and being transported into the games yourself is scary on a whole nother level. So this one really comes down to personal preference. But for me, I'm going to have to go with one of the 3 endings where you collect all of the tapes from Tape Girl. You are stuffed inside of presumably Freddy, while Glitch Trap dances around in the center of the pizzeria, the credits roll, and you realize that you are stuck, like all the past victims of Afton's crimes. This one is more of a psychological horror to me. You can probably tell that that's what I lean towards when it comes to this franchise for my favorite parts.
Music Man! Oh! Music Man! Music Man! Music Man! I called it! Music Man! Man! Music Man! Oh, I was so close.
Security Breach is definitely one of the games in the FNAF franchise. I don't think anyone would say that it's one of the scariest. Not even close. But do I think that it has some good moments? Of course. None of Security Breach is extremely scary, especially with the way that the graphics and the tone of the game are. But the red light green light section with the daycare endos is probably my favorite part of the game in general, when it comes to scary factor at least. The daycare attendant section was also pretty fun in a semi-scary way. Overall, Security Breach was not a very scary game. I think everyone can agree on that. There's not much else to say that was scary about this game. It definitely feels more like it was made for lore reasons than any other games before it, maybe besides Pizza Sim. But where Security Breach fails to deliver, its DLC manages to succeed. Ruin was so much fun to play on release day. Steel Wool knew that they needed to deliver a banger after the failed first few weeks of Security Breach, and I think that they 100% delivered. It seems like a great chunk of the fanbase agrees with this point. Steel Wool somehow made a goofy, bright style of Security Breach into a genuinely pretty terrifying at times atmosphere. Ruin definitely had some very scary scenes. Some of the jump scares being paired with the atmosphere just made them even stronger and more memorable. But the scariest part of Ruin to me is Gregory being revealed to be the Mimic. I don't think that Gregory was the Mimic during the main gameplay of Security Breach. I'm kind of indifferent on the whole Gregbot theory in and of itself, but it did feel like Steel Wool was teasing that Gregory wasn't Gregory throughout Ruin, especially near the end sequence right before we go down deeper into the Pizzaplex. His voice lines begin to not match up as well and he starts to glitch out. But Cassie didn't believe that Gregory wasn't really Gregory. She thought he was really stuck down there. So her finally realizing that the Mimic wasn't Gregory, and the Mimic sliding onto the screen was my scariest part out of what Security Breach had to offer. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed listening to my rambling about the scariest part of each FNAF game. Let me know in the comments what is your favorite and or scariest section of FNAF. I hope you all enjoyed and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!